West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Cohen.
Today, there is growing outrage on Capitol Hill over GOP lightning rod Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene and a remark she made comparing mask mandates to the horrors of the Holocaust. But predictably and also shamefully, the Georgia Republican is doubling down on her comments. Take a listen.
I stand by all of my statements. I said nothing wrong. And I think any rational Jewish person didn't like what happened in Nazi Germany, and any rational Jewish person doesn't like what's happening with overbearing mask mandates and overbearing vaccine policies.
Do you understand, though, why some would be upset and offended by the comment?
Well, do you understand how people feel about being forced to wear masks or being forced to have to take a vaccine or even have to say that whether they've taken it or not? These are just things that shouldn't be happening in America. This is a free country.
To be clear, there is no equivalence here, but for reference, here is Greene's original comment.
You know, we can look back in a time in history where people were told to wear a gold star, and they were definitely treated like second-class citizens, so much so that they were put in trains and taken to gas chambers in Nazi Germany. And this is exactly the type of abuse that Nancy Pelosi is talking about.
CNN's Suzanne Malveaux is up on Capitol Hill for us. Suzanne, how are members of Congress responding to this? Once again, members of Congress are going to be asked about Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments that just are beyond the pale once again.
Well, Jim, there are a lot of lawmakers who are speaking out today saying it is outrageous, it's offensive. At the very least, it is very ignorant of her to say these comments. But I should also let you know there doesn't seem to be much appetite for punishing her necessarily for these comments. She had already lost her committee assignments a long time ago for previous controversial and offensive comments that she's made in the past. It is possible that Congress could censure her, but there doesn't seem to be any discussion or move afoot about this. But there are individual members, lawmakers, who say that it is absolutely unacceptable that she's using this language, making these kind of ridiculous comparisons. We did hear from freshman Republican Congressman Peter Meyer. He is somebody who voted for Trump's impeachment, also supports the independent bipartisan bill, if you will, for a investigation of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And he had some very strong words for Congresswoman Greene.
Any comparisons to the Holocaust, it's beyond reprehensible. This is... I don't even have words to describe how disappointing it is to see this hyperbolic speech that frankly amps up and plays into a lot of the anti-Semitism that we've been seeing in our society today. Vicious attacks on the streets of New York and in Los Angeles that should be, and I do condemn that in the strongest terms. There is no excuse for that.
And Jim, most people are actually weighing in on Twitter with this conversation and their criticism. We heard from Congresswoman Liz Cheney saying this is evil lunacy. Congressman Adam Kinzinger saying absolute sickness. And then a Democrat, Congressman Jim McGovern, weighing in as well, saying Representative Greene's anti-Semitic language comparing the systematic murder of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust to wearing a mask is beyond disturbing. She is a deeply troubled person who needs to apologize and resign. GOP leader needs to address her anti-Semitism. Jim, it is notable that there are no tweets from the GOP leadership. There doesn't seem to be any appetite for at least publicly addressing what she has said. Jim?
Right, Suzanne. I mean, that is the big question at this hour is where is the comment from Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, other Republican leaders in the House? Why aren't they condemning this? We'll be following it, and I know you'll stay on top of it as well, Suzanne Laveau. Thanks so much for being with us. And joining me now is Rabbi Joshua Stanton, who is a senior fellow at the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership. Rabbi, let's talk about why this talk is so dangerous to compare something like a mask mandate to the Holocaust. I mean, obviously, it's ridiculous to compare a mask mandate or mask restrictions to the Holocaust. But I think even more disturbing here is the potential to minimize the profound seriousness of the Holocaust when you engage in this kind of rhetoric.
It's an appropriation of our history. It is a misuse and a false understanding of history that can continue to cause unnecessary deaths among Jews and among so many people. It is not her place to tell people what happened during the Holocaust. In fact, it is the place of those who are victims and children of victims and grandchildren. If you were to look at my family tree, you would see that most branches have been cut off summarily. And so it is not her place. If anything, perhaps it is a bit more of mine to describe the significance of those dark times. To put it in context, and numbers never do justice to the horrible realities, the Jewish population in the world has still not recovered since 1945. Our numbers are still down because we lost so many people, and our hearts remain broken. You cannot destroy a third of an entire people and expect us somehow to go back to business as usual, as though life were just normal. And then to have a leader in the United States speak falsely about our history, to weaponize it against us, to use it not just in wolf whistles, but in actual anti-Semitic tropes, to speak of something like a Jewish space laser. This is hate. The leadership needs to speak out against her. Representative McCarthy has a duty to the Jewish community to either speak out against her or push her to resign. And I so miss the time when parties held their own accountable for words of hate, words that could potentially be linked to violence, and words that are far beneath the leaders of our country.
Well, that's absolutely true. We just don't see enough of that in Washington anymore. Let me ask you, though, if Congresswoman Greene was watching right now, what would you say to her? What would be your message to her right now?
I would say stop speaking, start listening, start learning. Join me when it becomes safe after the pandemic, God willing. Join me on a trip to Auschwitz. Join me on a trip to some of the horrific ghettos. Join me on a trip so that you can actually learn what the Holocaust was about, rather than appropriating my history, lying about the Jewish people, and using it for political gain among right-wing extremists who have ideals that are not so different from the Nazis who took the lives of so many of my family members.
And we all remember Charlottesville in 2017, the shocking and horrific images of people carrying torches and shouting, Jews will not replace us, and blood and soil at the time. I had this exchange with then President Trump at the time. Let's watch.
The neo-Nazis started it, sir. The neo-Nazis started this. They showed up in Charlottesville. They showed up in Charlottesville to protest the removal of that statue.
And you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people.
No, sir.
In that
the Nazis.
Group,
there are no fine people in the Nazis.
I saw the same pictures as you.
There are no fine people in the Nazis.
You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue.
Rabbi, do you think that 4 years later we're still feeling the damaging effects from Trump's response to Charlottesville? One of the, I think, disturbing things that we're seeing these days is this rise in anti-Semitic attacks across the country. Your thoughts on where things stand right now for the Jewish community and in dealing with hate in the United States?
The former president brought hate to the mainstream, and we are feeling the ripple effects right now. The idea that we could even have a conversation about whether there are good and bad Nazis indicates how far we've fallen. This is not simply an era of polarization. This is an era of fanaticism. And the right wing has moved to the point, the extreme right, that it now is akin to fascism. We need to do more, and it is time to act, not just speak. And I have to say, you did something very brave. You spoke out against falsehoods being preached from the biggest podium in the country. And I think that's where it begins. We need to reclaim healthy dialogue and discourse. We need to reclaim a notion that what we say has to relate in a meaningful way to facts, that we can differ on the basis of how we interpret those facts, but that we need to have a shared sense of what history was so that we can learn from it and apply it meaningfully today. And what is so scary is that on the extreme right, there is an effort to lie about the past, both in the United States and in Europe, in an effort to shape the future in a way that will be harmful for the majority of Americans who are connected in many different ways to different religious communities, different cultural communities, different linguistic communities. So we need to reclaim the past, engage in an honest assessment of what actually happened so that we know how we got here and we know how we can change course.
It is Monday, the 24th of May of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. That's right, we've sliced and diced and taken everything that was left over from the weekend and reconstituted it into something very palatable for this fine Monday. Yes, River City Hash Mondays. Hey, how are you? Another one of those weekends. It looks like Lukashenko, the Belarusian strongman, who has been the only president of Belarus since it became Belarus after the fall of the Soviet Empire. Well, he decided to hijack a Ryanair jetliner, commercial jetliner, so that he could arrest what they are calling a dissident, and others are calling a journalist. And some people are saying this is as bad as what happened to Snowden. This is as bad as what happened to Assange. I don't think so. Okay, I know. People say, oh, well, what about when Obama tried to bring that plane down to arrest Morales, and Morales wasn't even on the plane? Well, I don't know about that either. All I know is that Lukashenko is a dictator. And do they get away with that? I don't know. Apparently the EU doesn't like it, so I don't know how much of, well, shall we say, an American construct of outrage this is, since it looks like Europe's pretty angry. Okay. Yeah, it's called a hijacking and an abduction. All right. The girlfriend of the journalist was able to text her parents as she was getting arrested. She had just enough time to text Mama. That was it. That's all they allowed her to thumb out. Because, hey, Lukashenko was one of those kind of guys. Friends with Vladimir Putin, by the way. And it's funny because all the usual suspects are up in arms about, this is just like Assange. I'm looking at you, Gigi. I'm looking at you, Mark Ames. I'm looking at a bunch of them. Why are they so quick on the draw? Well, other news out there is that critical race theory is taking a hit. Apparently it's going to be against the law to teach about slavery. Yeah, don't want the kiddies to know the truth about the United States of America because then they might want to change it. Yeah, wouldn't you want to? Owning another human being is wrong. Pretending you never did is even more wrong. All the usual suspects again are up in arms today. I'm looking at you, Andrew Sullivan, about critical race theory, because it is the real racism. It's demagoguing a whole group of people. You mean like white people? You're saying all white people are racist? No, I don't think that's what it means. And once again, critical race theory is a legal theory taught in law schools. I doubt it's going to make it into the elementary school. Okay? Just so you know. The 1619 Project is journalism. And once again, what are you afraid of? That's right. The Civil War really wasn't about slavery. It was about states' rights. Yeah, it was about states' rights to be able to own slaves. So give me a break. And with that, I should remind folks I am still currently under suspension at Facebook for bullying Nazis. How do you do that? Well, you talk back to them. You answer a question with sarcasm and you've bullied them. They can threaten you with violence, and then you report that, and they go, oh, no, that doesn't violate terms of use, but you post a GIF of the crying cheerleader from Glee, and that's considered bullying and harassment. Yeah, a crying cheerleader alone in a car in the rain is called bullying and harassment. Actually, they called it sexual nudity. What? Whatever it takes to get rid of the liberals. And it's always so convenient because I noticed that a lot of, people I know on Facebook who are of the liberal bent have also mysteriously been suspended in this same time frame. Because something's coming up. Whenever we get suspended, something's coming up, like the election. That was a good one. So all the right-wingers were able to spin all their lies. And anybody who said, hey, you're a liar, got suspended for bullying and harassing right-wing Nazis because you called them liars. Can't do that. Yeah, the appeal's still with the Oversight Board. But, the Oversight Board, I have to surmise, might be comprised with a bunch of young'uns who have never cracked a book from humanities, probably never read a novel. Certainly not Thackeray. Yeah. Would they read Thackeray? Do we even know who Thackeray is? Well, that right there says I have to be judged by the likes of that. Okay. No wonder you think that a GIF of a crying cheerleader alone in a car in the rain is sexual violence. I know people say it's just the algorithm. It's the artificial intelligence. But you know what? The coder came before the artificial intelligence. Never forget that. Oh, well, what's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, as we start off on this fine River City Hash Mondays, because we do have a curated show for you. Yes, we do. Well, a man with a history of arson-related arrests pleaded not guilty to setting fire to the historic San Gabriel Roman Catholic Mission in Southern California. 7 nooses halted construction at a Connecticut Amazon warehouse, and census data shows West Virginia lost a higher percentage of its residents than any other state in the nation. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where an Egyptian court will allow the Suez Canal to keep holding the Japanese-owned container ship that blocked traffic for 6 days in March. And British Black Lives Matter activist Sasha Johnson is in critical condition after being shot in the head in South London. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for doing that and so much more. I know you've been pretty darn busy in real life, so thank you for all that you do. If you would then look across the page to the left of the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, there is the link to our Patreon site. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring patronage helps us pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue resisting as we have been doing for the last 10 years. A full decade of continuous 24/7, 365 resistance radio, as the founders originally intended. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds to us once a month, we are then able to stretch those dollars. We are then able to pay those bills. And then we are able to continue this, well, powerhouse of resistance that we've been doing for that full decade. It is our 10th year anniversary. And we're the little powerhouse that could, and we are continuing to do so because of your generosity. Thank you very much. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, go to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that. And thank you, Tom, for doing that and so much more. Follow me on Twitter @JusticePutnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms, but not on Facebook for a while, unless Kelly is able to do it. But she's been pretty busy, so it's not like she's living at the computer right now. So do look for the show notes and links wherever you might be able to find them. Find it on Twitter or go to Daily Kos. I post it there, of course. And those show notes and links, cite the actual reportage. And that's very important. Get the real story. And if you would like to follow the show on Twitter, find us at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and plug my music show that comes on Sunday nights, the Justice Department Musique Sans Frontières. We pick a poem. This the royal we, as they say. We get a poem and create a theme, create a playlist of that theme, and it's a little sonic poem each Sunday night from 8 p.m. on the Pacific to 9 p.m. on the Pacific. And then the podcast comes out. I'll be posting that podcast a little bit later today. I was, shall we say, a bit busy last evening with, responsibilities to caring for my elderly mom and whatnot. I should mention she had a birthday here not terribly long ago on the 10th. And, she's getting a bit depressed, 84 years old. I find her kind of crying every now and then. And she says she's just depressed. So I finally, over the weekend, asked her what she was depressed about. Well, people who are depressed usually don't tell you because they're trying to figure it out themselves. But it's clear that end of life, because I have them also, the questions that come at end of life, like, was it worth it? And did I do good? Why? The big why. So I just reminded my mom that, I realized that I don't tell her enough that I love her. I don't hug her enough anymore. I get on her case. So no wonder she's feeling depressed, So I just had to remind her, come on, Ma. You're a good mom. You kept us together. We're a family. Here we are. Well, it's still hard because I have those same questions, and I'm not 84 years old. Okay, I'm about 18 years younger than she is. She was a young mom. Problem with having a young mom is that when you get old, you're old like your mom. Yeah. Anyway, if you have loved ones, love them. give them a hug. Sometimes we forget. All right, well, enough of that. Let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. It comes out of the Associated Press. Now, let me scroll up here. Oh, and it is by anonymous staff at the Associated Press. A man with a history of arson-related arrests pleaded not guilty to setting a fire that caused millions of dollars in damage to a historic Southern California Roman Catholic mission. John David Corey, age 57, is charged with breaking in and setting a July 11 pre-dawn blaze that engulfed the rooftop and most of the interior of the San Gabriel Mission east of Los Angeles as it was undergoing renovations to mark its upcoming 250th anniversary celebration. We actually reported that here on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, at least a mention of it. Mostly because when I was a kid, when we first moved from Oregon to Southern California, we stayed at my great aunt's place in West Covina before we secured our domicile in Roland Heights in the San Gabriel Valley. And the San Gabriel Mission was our Catholic church that we attended to for a number of years. Now, no one was hurt. Prosecutors said the flames caused millions of dollars in damage, but firefighters managed to save the mission's altar and historic paintings. Corey, who has been described as homeless, entered pleas in Los Angeles to 2 counts of arson of an uninhabited structure and 1 count each of arson during a state of emergency, first-degree residential burglary, and possession of flammable material. The church was the 4th in a string of Roman Catholic missions established across California by Junipero Serra, an 18th-century Franciscan priest who was canonized by Pope Francis in 2015, and he was the missionary during the era of Spanish colonization. While many credit Serra with spreading Catholicism along the West Coast, he has long been a symbol of oppression among indigenous activists, mostly because to convert the Indians, he would enslave them. And when they died, they went to God because they were baptized. Now, authorities have not released a motive for the arson, although Corey has a history of arson-related arrests in the San Gabriel area. Corey was arrested 2 days after the fire on suspicion of trying to burn a San Gabriel business. He pleaded no contest and was sentenced that September to 3 years in jail. And the San Gabriel Valley Tribune reported that authorities say they later tied him to the church blaze. Another bit of interesting facts here is that I delivered papers for the San Gabriel. It was called the San Gabriel Valley Daily Tribune back in the 60s. I had an exceedingly large route, a bicycle route, when they allowed kids to do that. And I had over 360 subscriptions that I delivered every day. Sundays too. Thursdays, I had a 30-paper free throw to people that were not subscribed on my route, and it got really hard to find those 30. Anyway, the San Gabriel Valley Daily Tribune back in the day was the go-to paper when you weren't reading the LA Times. Court records show he also was sentenced to 3 years in county jail for setting fire to a dilapidated structure at a construction site and got 50 days in jail for setting a fire in a restaurant in 2015, the San Gabriel Valley Tribune said. Corey's criminal record also included convictions for drug use, theft and burglary, and vandalizing a house of worship. More anonymous staff at the AP bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And no wonder they're anonymous. They probably want to get fired for having, well, some sort of slanted bias. Amazon has temporarily shut down a new warehouse construction site in Connecticut after a seventh noose was found hanging over a beam. A series of incidents local police called potential hate crimes. Potential. Another rope tied like a noose was discovered last Wednesday at the site in Windsor, about 10 miles north of Hartford, prompting an intensified law enforcement investigation and calls by the state NAACP for the suspect or suspects to be brought to justice. Amazon said in a statement that it is closing the site until today so that additional security measures can be put in place. We continue to be deeply disturbed by the incidents happening at the construction site in Windsor, Amazon said. Hate, racism, or discrimination have no place in our society and are certainly not tolerated in an Amazon workplace. Windsor police said they are working with the FBI and state police. A reward has been doubled to $100,000 for information leading to the identification of the culprit or culprits. The first news was found at the site last month. Connecticut NAACP leaders joined with state and local officials at a news conference outside the site on Thursday to condemn what they called racist acts. We're here to make sure that people are safe, said Scott X. Esdale, president of the state NAACP. We're making sure that the voices are heard and that this situation is dealt with in a professional and adequate way. Carlos Best, an iron worker and foreman at the site, said he has heard racist remarks there, including some made by a worker that he fired. Personally, on this job here, I've seen a lot of racism, he said at the news conference. This is not the only construction site that these things occur on, and it has to stop. Rabbi of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. After her company told employees in 2017 to start working remotely, customer service representative Haley Miller decided to break from her lifelong home of West Virginia. The beaches of St. Petersburg, Florida, provided a far different view than the mountains of her native state. There were palm trees, a vivacious arts and restaurant scene, and fewer potholes. There are tons of things to do, said Miller, now 29, who still works for the retail company. It's a very welcoming and inclusive town. And she is not alone. According to newly released data from the U.S. Census Bureau, West Virginia lost a higher percentage of its residents than any other state in the nation. From 2010 to 2020, the population dropped 3.2%, or about 60,000 people. Because of that, West Virginia was one of only 7 states to lose a congressional seat following the 2020 census. Reasons for leaving vary, but common themes emerge: a lack of opportunity or low pay, not enough to do, a political climate that some find oppressive, poor cell phone service and internet service. And according to the Census Bureau, only 79% of West Virginian households have a broadband internet subscription, the 5th smallest rate in the country. The population has suffered from changing demographics, with deaths outpacing births for the last 2 decades. In an effort to reverse the population losses, West Virginia started encouraging remote workers to move to the state of 1.79 million residents through a program that will pay them $12,000 cash, along with free passes for a year's worth of whitewater rafting, golf, rock climbing, and other outdoor activities. Miller wants no part of it. The energy poured into luring out-of-staters, she said, should be spent helping people there who are suffering the most. About 16% of West Virginia residents live in poverty, surpassed by only Arkansas, Kentucky, New Mexico, Louisiana, and Mississippi. I wonder what those states have in common. The nation's second largest coal producer, West Virginia, has lost 56% of its mining jobs since 2009 as power plants turn toward renewable energy sources. You know, Maine had a really big drop in employment too when the whale oil industry collapsed. Teachers are leaving for far better paying jobs, especially in bordering states. Despite winning 5% raises following a lengthy strike in 2018, West Virginia teachers remain 48th in the nation in average salaries. Because of that, many West Virginia county school districts rely heavily on substitute teachers. You know, the ones that don't get any benefits. When Rebecca Recco left Bell, West Virginia in 2017, she was making $42,000 as an art teacher. She now earns $68,000 teaching middle school art in Oakland, California. Moving was about more than just better pay. She described an anti-union, anti-teacher sentiment, including new laws passed by the legislature, creating charter schools and withholding teacher pay during labor strikes. West Virginia reminds me of a drunk cousin, Recco said. It's like this cousin that you have that you can't get itself together. I love West Virginia. I love it. It's where my roots are from, but I couldn't with that state anymore. Well, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, Worth the Wait. The fact that Monster got a release at all is noteworthy. Since its 2018 debut on the festival circuit, actors Kelvin Harrison Jr. and John David Washington have gotten big career boosts, especially within the last year. It's interesting here to see their earlier efforts showing that even before the acclaim, Harrison's and Washington's respective talents were apparent. Told mostly via flashback, Monster tells the story of the downfall of a high school student, Steve, played by Harrison, who, along with two other kids, is arrested and put on trial for supposedly taking part in the brutal robbery and murder of a Harlem bodega owner. Steve, a talented, aspiring filmmaker, knows the importance of narration. He knows that what isn't included can be just as important as what is. This one is more complex than the classic wrongly accused trope, though. It turns out Steve is acquainted with the ringleader James, played to a T by rapper A$AP Rocky, and was indeed at the crime scene immediately prior to the incident. Still, how much or how little he knows remains a mystery until the final moments. At times, Monster has the feel of a long TV crime drama episode, but the acting saves it from that. In particular, the supporting work by Jeffrey Wright and Jennifer Hudson, who plays Steve's shocked middle-class parents, Jennifer Ely, who shines as Steve's court-appointed attorney, and Tim Blake Nelson as Steve's film teacher, all deserve special credit. Ultimately, though, it's Harrison who carries the film past occasional lapses in the script. Monster is worth the watch, if only to see the acting. But it's one guaranteed to stay with you, especially in an era when the topics of policing, prosecution, and criminal justice reform are front and center. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your fast-track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
And I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today we're going to talk about an oncoming wave of disabling grief that could hit lots of people.
And we'll try and unconfuse you about the complicated new mask-wearing guidelines from the CDC.
This is a sad story, but it's important. People who have lost loved ones to COVID are at high risk for a mental health problem called prolonged grief disorder. How is that different from normal mourning?
Well, it's paralyzing. Tanya, this is a high level of mental anguish that keeps people from leaving their homes, taking care of their families, and holding down a job. It's a recognized syndrome that can go on for a year or more without let-up. Ordinarily, after losing someone close, you can be anguished, and then you start to function again in time. But people with prolonged grief describe their lives as simply waiting to die. The scary thing is that it looks like there will be a huge number of these people because of COVID. Katie Harmon Courage, one of our Siam.com contributors, crunched some numbers in a story that's now up on our website. About 5 to 10% of bereaved people get this condition. There are almost 600,000 COVID dead in the U.S., and each one leaves behind about 9 close mourners, research shows. This means there could be 250,000 to 500,000 people disabled by grief in the coming months. Mental health specialists say COVID deaths make bereaved people particularly prone to this problem. The deaths are often sudden. Those left behind are cut off from normal mourning rituals, says Catherine Shear, a psychiatrist at Columbia University. Plus, travel and activity restrictions make it hard to make connections and rebuild lives. Add on economic hardship and general anxiety, and you've got a real problem. And there are already signs that the pandemic triggers this disorder. Research published earlier this year found indications of prolonged grief in nearly 38% of pandemic bereaved individuals in China. That is more than triple the typical rate. The disorder can also exacerbate suicidality and substance misuse.
Can people get help for this condition?
That could be really tough. We're not ready for something this big in terms of mental health resources. Grief disorder is usually treated with months of therapy. That works. But we don't have therapists. There are about 30 psychologists and fewer than 16 psychiatrists per 100,000 people in the U.S. Numbers are even lower in poor communities that have suffered the most deaths during the pandemic. People in such areas, who tend to be people of color, often can't afford insurance to cover mental health treatment. So there aren't easy answers. Experts say a safe return to mourning rituals, vaccinated or masked, could help. So could relieving other pandemic stresses like getting evicted or going hungry. That relief gives a grieving family a chance to deal with the loss of a parent, for example. And the Biden administration has promised $2.5 billion to aid state mental health services. But I don't know if that money will bolster the grief counseling that's needed here. If you do need help, if you or someone you know is struggling or having thoughts of suicide, there are places to turn. Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Or contact the Crisis Text Line by texting TALK, T-A-L-K, to 741-741. The CDC recently issued new guidelines saying that vaccinated people no longer need to wear a mask or social distance in most indoor and outdoor settings, with a few exceptions like hospitals. What do you make of the guidelines, and are you ready to ditch your mask?
The new guidelines came as a surprise to many public health experts and to the public. Just a couple weeks ago, the CDC was saying that vaccinated people needed to wear masks indoors and in crowded outdoor settings, so it felt a bit like whiplash. Some accused the CDC of caving to public pressure, but the CDC says its new guidelines are based purely on the evidence that vaccines are extremely good at not just preventing people from getting infected, but also from transmitting the virus to others. Still, some experts say the guidance was premature. As Angela Rasmussen, a virologist at the Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization at Canada's University of Saskatchewan, pointed out in a recent article in Slate, it's not so much the science they object to. The vaccines really do protect people. It's the way that science is being communicated. The biggest problem is there's no way to know if someone who's not wearing a mask has been vaccinated or not. It's basically an honor code. And that could leave unvaccinated people, including young children, or immunocompromised people, vulnerable to getting COVID. Plus, it makes it virtually impossible for businesses to enforce mask guidelines, which could make essential workers feel unsafe. And we're already seeing some places that are getting rid of their mask mandates, even though more than half the country is still unvaccinated.
Tanya, you asked our Siam colleagues, many of whom are now fully vaccinated, about if, when, and where they're going to keep wearing their masks. What did you hear?
Many told me they were happy to ditch their masks outside in uncrowded areas. One even said she felt near giddy, but they were planning to keep them on indoors in places like grocery stores or public transit. They wanted to set an example of protecting others and also protecting their children or loved ones who are unvaccinated. Others said they were happy to comply with state or local guidelines, but were ready to stop wearing masks in situations the CDC says are safe, especially the people who wear glasses, who are constantly having to fight the fog. Personally, I've been happy to take my mask off when I'm outside away from other people, but I plan on keeping my mask on when I'm in most indoor settings with strangers, at least until more people are vaccinated and the number of COVID cases is much lower. What about you, Josh?
I keep mine in my pocket, and I put it on when I run into crowds, indoors or outside.
Sounds reasonable. For my part, it's not that I think the vaccine won't protect me, although no vaccine is 100% effective. It's more the fact that given so many people are unvaccinated, I don't want to make people guess whether or not I am. It's not a huge inconvenience to wear one, and if it helps model behavior that keeps others safe, I'm happy to keep it on. Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly, and check out Siam.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Die in the electric chair, or be killed by a firing squad. It's your choice. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. And those really are the options, firing squad or electric chair, if you are on death row in South Carolina, according to a bill just signed into law by that state's governor, Henry McMaster. Technically, lethal injection remains the state's preferred method to kill people, but when lethal injection drugs are not available, then it will be either the electric chair or a firing squad. And lethal injection drugs have not been available in South Carolina for over a decade because pharmaceutical companies have been insisting that their drugs be used to help people, not kill them. So, South Carolina needed a plan B if it were to crank up anew its machinery of death. A number of legislators voted against the bill because they said that having recently outlawed most abortions on the basis of the sanctity of life, they could not vote to intentionally kill human beings. That argument lost. One proposed amendment would have allowed live streaming of executions so that people could see what was being done in their name. That proposal lost. Another proposal would have required lawmakers to attend the executions they have demanded and authorized to see their handiwork carried out. That amendment also lost. So, how soon this mistake-prone, racist, arbitrary system of state executions will spring back to life in South Carolina? Well, that's not clear. But, based on the new law, that day is coming. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1959. That was the day Operation Humanity marched in support of New York City hospital workers fighting for union recognition and bargaining rights at area voluntary hospitals. Workers organizing with Local 1199 had been on strike since May 8th and called on the public to support them in their efforts. They pointed out that the 30,000 overwhelmingly black and Latino workers were fighting against economic exploitation and discrimination. Striking workers condemned their paltry wages, which averaged $21 less a week than workers at city hospitals. They added they had no job security or benefits and were not even eligible for unemployment. The Central Labor Council, the NAACP, and area civil rights activists all supported the march. In their book, Upheaval in the Quiet Zone, Leon Fink and Brian Greenberg note that a union largely led by Jews had squared off against
against hospitals directed by the scions of the city's Jewish community, to the degree that it was a family affair. The 1959 fight thus took on the bitterness of a civil war. As well, Catholic trade union leaders decried the anti-union fervor of hospitals run by the Archdiocese. Fink and Greenberg illustrate the support of fiery Mike Quill, president of TWU Local 100, who denounced hospital trustees as worse than famed segregationist Governor Orville Faubus of Arkansas. Weeks into the strike, area trade unions supplied reinforcements in the form of donations, loans, and groceries. Local IBEW members assessed themselves $1 a week for the strikers. Many unions regularly joined picket lines in support. Though the strike would fail to secure union recognition and collective bargaining rights, there were minimal gains. Solidarity galvanized the membership for future battles. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 54 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting only a high in the low 70s. We were in the upper 70s yesterday and through the weekend, and, we'll be a bit cooler. Cloudy skies early, followed by partial clearing with a slight chance of a rain shower this afternoon. The winds will be out of the west at a brisk 20 to 15 miles per hour. Looks like we're going to have overnight lows in the upper 40s with partly cloudy skies that will give way to occasional showers overnight. Winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And looks like we'll be getting something a little less than a quarter inch between today's rain, expected rain, and tonight's. And then rain showers early tomorrow with some sunshine late in the day. Highs near 70, winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And once again, that looks like it's going to bring a little less than a quarter inch as well. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon have increased to 11,068. I should remind you, these are only totals from Friday. The updated weekend totals will be coming in later today or early tomorrow. Deceased continue to stand at 141, though, and that was an increase from early last week. Or actually, that increase was from early last week, and it has stood at 141 for a bit. Grass pollen is rated very high right outside the window in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 23 parts per million. And the daytime UV index, though we are cloudy, remains very high at 8. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.18 inches. Visibility is at 8 miles. And relative humidity is at 86%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 55 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 58 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 78 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 68 and partly cloudy. Kabul is 72 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 81 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 70 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 60 degrees and just merely cloudy. San Francisco, California is 50 and mostly cloudy with a fog advisory on the bay, so take care. And New York is 65 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Reuters staff brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. An Egyptian court yesterday, Sunday, rejected a complaint by the Japanese owner of a container ship that blocked traffic in the Suez Canal for 6 days in March against the vessel's continued detention by canal authorities, a lawyer said. The Ever Given, one of the world's largest container ships, became jammed across the canal in high winds on March 23rd, halting traffic in both directions and disrupting global trade. The complaint was attached to a case at the Economic Court in Ismailia, in which the Suez Canal Authority sought $916 million in compensation from the Ever Given's owner, Shoei Kisen. Also on Sunday yesterday, the head of the SCA suggested in a TV interview that the canal would accept the reduced sum of $550 million, slightly lower than the $600 million he had mentioned earlier this month, for a potential out-of-court settlement. SCA Chairman Osama Rabbi said a $200 million deposit could be enough to secure the ship's release, with the rest payable separately. In a statement following Sunday's ruling, the Suez Canal Authority said it bore no responsibility for the Ever Given's grounding, reasserting that responsibility lay with the ship's captain alone.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
More anonymous staff at Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Black Lives Matter activist Sasha Johnson is critically ill after being shot in the head in South London in the early hours of Sunday yesterday. London's Metropolitan Police appealed for witnesses after officials found a woman who they said was thought to be in her 20s suffering from a gunshot injury in Peckham. Police said the woman, who they have not named, remained in hospital with life-threatening injuries. We are all hoping that this young woman's condition improves, Detective Chief Inspector Jimmy Teal said. Johnson, a mother of two, has been a leading figure in the Black Lives Matter in the UK and is a member of the Taking the Initiative Party's Executive Leadership Committee, the party said on its Instagram account. The attack happened in the early hours of Sunday morning following numerous death threats as a result of her activism, her group said. A friend of Johnson told the BBC, however, that she thought the incident was more related to rival gangs than her activism, and she believed Johnson was not the intended victim. Well, sad story, but that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.